What's happening, guys? Welcome back to today's video. So in today's video, what I want to take you through is my sort of top 5 exercises for essentially developing lower body athleticism. For me, athleticism is about being strong, being resilient, and being able to express and control forces of ground contact, right? So whether that's sprinting, jumping, change of direction, landing in nice, strong, safe positions that keep us healthy, to keep us doing what we enjoy doing, and to try and make us resilient against those potential injury risks that come with all sports. Now, for me, when it comes to lower body training, especially if you're an athlete, you do a lot, right? So we don't want junk volume. The way I look at exercises is it the best exercise for developing the things that I want to develop? And that for me is ultimately about teaching positions, teaching how to become a hip dominant athlete. And for me, hip dominant is about really building our neuromuscular and kinesthetic awareness of really attaining and becoming efficient at developing hip extension. Yes, we want to be strong in knee flexion and the posterior chain in general, but hip extension for me is king. So all these exercises are a way of me really being able to promote that hip extension. Because this is ultimately what keeps us resilient, right? So when we look at again, I've done a video on sort of training equals rehab, and in that I sort of discussed the sort of work I've sort of done with Dr. Stuart McGill and studied from Dr. Tim Hewitt in terms of both knees and backs. And again, the overarching theme here is that become a hip dominant athlete. The glute max, the glute complex, the hamstrings, these are our main force producers, but also our main force absorbers, right? They have the biggest control over our femur in space upon ground contact. So when they are strong and they understand what they should be doing in all situations, we are way less likely to get hurt. This is why you won't see me utilize too much in the way of machines, because yes, they train the tissue, but they don't train it in the environment that you will need to utilize it on the field or the court or whatever it is. So for me, everything is about developing ourselves neuromuscularly, the brain muscle connection, and how we use it to produce force, produce stability in the environment we need to work. So let's get stuck into it. So exercise number 1 is sprinting, okay? If you want to build hip dominant athleticism, sprinting is the number 1 tool, right? There is no greater exercise as far as I'm concerned, not just for athletes, but for all people. Now, it's not to say you should go out and start with sprinting full tilt today if you haven't done anything for years. We need to gradually build you up to that. But for me, once you get to the point where you are able to sprint, be that on a hill, on a track, or on a field, is that we are developing high levels of coordination, rhythm, and timing, all things that are necessary for becoming a good athlete and a good mover. It teaches us to really utilize our posterior chain to produce force. Okay, if you're a quad dominant athlete, the sprinting looks clunky, it feels clunky, and you struggle to produce force, especially in the later part of a run. So really training to become a sprinter, essentially, and going through the process of learning that skill, and that means trying to master the drills that kind of come with it. I don't see any negatives to it, because you just become a better mover and a better athlete, and that is ultimately, at least for me, the main thing I want for myself and all the people that I work with. So number 1, get sprinting. If you're not sprinting, you're leaving so much performance on the table, because you're not going to be efficient, you're not going to be fast, and you're going to have potential risks of injuries when you get into those later stages of the game and fatigue comes in. So again, most sports are repeat sprint sports. You want to master our craft, be a sprinter. Exercise number 2 is going to be a variation or a sprint drill that I think is really great for developing the posterior chain and hip dominance as well as resilience, and that is the stiff leg bound. So when I've been working with football players, rugby players, one of the main things that I see, is mainly because they're quad dominant, is their inability to utilize the posterior chain quickly to propel themselves forward. So the stiff leg bound for me is a great exercise to teach people trunk stability, single leg hip extension, because ultimately, as I sort of mentioned, hip extension is king, and learning how to strike the ground under our center of mass and propel ourselves forward with our hamstrings. Now, from a injury prevention standpoint, this also teaches us that stiffness and resilience upon ground contact through the hamstring that is ultimately going to help us become more efficient and more resilient whilst combating fatigue of a 90-minute, 80-minute game. Okay, so this is something that I want my athletes to become masters at. Utilize this for 30, 40 meters. And just, again, it's practice, practice, practice. All of these movements, every movement is a skill, right? And it's understanding that it's our ability to perform that skill under different levels of fatigue that is going to ultimately make us fitter, faster, stronger, right? So the stiff leg bound is exercise number 2. Again, it's a regression from sprinting into a more sort of isolated drill. but it's still moving quickly. We're still training the tissue to become efficient in those fast speeds that sometimes the gym can neglect. Okay, so now we're moving into the gym, we're building strength, and we still want to have that carryover onto the field. So my number one movement is a box squat. So for me, the box squat is just a hip dominant squatting exercise, right? We can get some heavy weight on our back, we can sit back into the posterior chain, replicate in positions that I would want to see upon landing two-footed, you know, but then really focusing more on the hip extension drive off the box. Now, when we do normal squats, yes, we'll utilize the quads, but sometimes what people find is your quad dominant, you utilize too much, and you're not getting much hip extension. And if that's the case, we're going to put our low back at risk, I believe, when performing heavy squats. So the box squats basically takes away some of that ability to cheat. It makes it really evident when you're doing it right and doing it wrong. And then this is something that we can get better at over time, because the greater you are at sitting back into your posterior chain, really developing the engine of the posterior chain, becoming hip dominant, the better athlete you will become. Okay, that's been shown by Dr. Tim Hewitt by utilizing a neuromuscular training program that is very hip dominant, can massively protect you against ACL tears and I believe low back injuries through the work of Dr. Stuart McGill. So mastering the box squat is really important, and it's a way that we can load the system to deal with heavier loads and really help us produce force. Now, from this point of view in the box squat, what I really like to do is to play around with the loading strategies. So yes, I like to go heavy and to grind out a few reps, but I also like to go a little bit lighter and really learn to utilize that movement in fast dynamic efforts. Okay, we're trying to bridge the gap between the gym and the field of play, and that's the one way we can kind of do it. It's by no means complete, but it's getting closer. Exercise number 4 is going to be the Romanian deadlift. Now, the Romanian deadlift is a true hip hinge movement, okay? And this is something that we as athletes should be absolute masters of. The hip hinge is the foundation of all athletic movement and all lower body movements in a whole, right? If you can't perform a simple hip hinge, you are going to be putting your low back, your knees at jeopardy when you do all other exercises, because you have an inability to utilize and recruit the posterior chain as effectively as you could. So mastering the Romanian deadlift is really important. Again, technique is king. I'm not worried about how much weight you lift to begin with. Focus on the form, load the movement. As you get better at the movement, you will be able to handle more and more weight, and that is getting stronger. Okay, getting stronger is not lifting heavier. Getting stronger is loading a movement and practicing with heavier loads, and building the resilience and the neuromuscular understanding of how to perform that exercise under heavier loads. So medium weights, light weights, heavy weights, as you get better, just get really good at that freaking movement, okay? And then the last exercise is going to be the high box step down. Now, for me, this is a great exercise that really teaches us how to utilize a single leg for stability, with coordination. So now we're utilizing the quadriceps a little bit more because the knee is traveling forward, but we're using them with the hamstrings and with the glutes. And what you'll see as I get to the top of this movement is there's definitely a timing component to this, right? What I want to see at the top of this movement is the knee and the hip extend at exactly the same time, exactly like you would want in triple extension if you're performing an Olympic lift or a jump. And again, as I've sort of said, athleticism is timing, rhythm, and coordination. So here we've got inter and intramuscular coordination, so muscles working as a group to produce not only the stability through the entire range of motion, but also the force production to get to the top of that movement. And again, it's a way of us slowing the movement down and really thinking, right, am I getting that hip involved? Can I feel that contraction of the glute and hamstring tying? Can I feel my quad doing its job of stabilizing the ankle, the foot, you know, all those oscillation, all those small muscles that don't get much love in other exercises are now being worked and conditioned. Because the other thing I love about a high box step down is there is no downtime through the whole set. The leg is working for the entire time you're on it. So you're not resting at the bottom, you're not resting at the top. It's continual kind of movement, okay? And this is now going to build that real fitness and capacity component of all these muscles individually, but also as they work together. And again, as I've said, this is why you won't see me using too many machines, because machines have a cost of doing business. Yes, they are great for isolating muscles, but nothing we do on our feet is in isolation. Everything has to learn to work together. So you can have amazingly strong quads and hamstrings by utilizing machines, but they can't talk to each other and they don't know how to produce stability and movements through ranges of motion. All right, so this is why body weight is king. Body weight, mastering these movements through body weight is how we're going to become better movers and better athletes, and ultimately become more resilient and robust against potential risks of injury, which I always say is our biggest obstacle to progress is getting injured. Okay, I don't want us to do 4 to 6 weeks of training, injure ourselves, and we've got to take 2 weeks off and slide back down that sort of snakes and ladders board and have to start again. Okay, our goal is to build consistency, and we can't have consistency if we're constantly picking up niggles. And I think a lot of the niggles we pick up, from my experience, are because people haven't spent the time to learn how to hip extend, learn how the rhythm and timing of the knee and the hip and how they acutely work together. So this is something that I think is massively overlooked in the training world, and that's why I like these 5 exercises for building strength, resilience, and athleticism in everyone that I work with. So hopefully you took something from this video. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. If you are interested in any coaching, please follow the link below to my website. If you would like to take advantage of that, please feel free to reach out and we can have a quick chat before you purchase. But if that's all, until next time, guys, see you then.